Welcome. So please keep your microphone mute and turn off your camera during the presentations to minimize any distractions. There will be question and answer sessions at the end. However, if you have any question during the presentations, please type in our chat bar and I'll read off at the end of the presentations. Now, please welcome our NCS President Srini to introduce our presenter.
Well, thank you, Jan. Good afternoon to you all. This is Srinivas Reddy Vanga, President for AACEI-National Capital Section. Good afternoon and welcome to OBO leadership, Angel and Mangus. Thank you so much for accepting our request to share the knowledge and experience to our AACE members. Angel is Managing Director, Program Development, Coordination and Support, U.S. Department of State, Bureau of Overseas Building Operations. Mr. Dyson has over 30 years of experience in design and construction industry and has previously served in the real estate and design and engineering offices at the U.S. Department of State. He has been recognized with numerous awards for leadership and superior performance at the Department of State. Welcome, Angel. Now I request Doug Mitton, Project Controls, to welcome Mangus. Doug Mitton was also past president to AACEI-National Capital Section.
Yes, Menzies is a director of the Office of Cost Management with OBO. That office does the value engineering, construction cost management, and cost risk management. He has over 30 years of experience, primarily in the area of construction and contracts management, estimating, and project controls. He's worked with both the private and public sectors, including many years in various international locations in Europe, Middle East, and South America. In addition to his work on the U.S. diplomatic facilities, Mr. Wilson's experience includes work on institutional and cultural facilities for other government agencies, as well as time spent on construction of offshore oil and gas production facilities. He's an active participant with the Construction Industry Institute, and he has completed or is currently working on several research teams focusing on industry best practices for international projects, controls, interface management, and digital workforce issues. He is educated and trained as a quantity surveyor in the UK and is a professional quantity surveyor in Canada. And he's also lead AP.
Thank you, Doug.
Now it's all yours, Angel and Mangus.
Thanks, Srini. Mangus and I are really happy to be here. Really appreciate the attendance. We're going to walk you through some of the program, walk you through a case study so that we can sort of talk about specific phases where Mangus's group sort of does the estimating, the risk management, value engineering throughout that process, and then we'll end with some sort of just general discussions about the kinds of impacts our program makes. Next. So OBO is responsible for all of the diplomatic facilities overseas, which means that we are responsible for the planning, design, construction, and maintenance of those things. And because we are owners, we make different kinds of decisions about what we do on our projects because we understand sort of the long-term life cycle of these kinds of projects. Next. So many of you know our mission and vision, which is to provide safe, secure, functional, and resilient facilities. That's sort of the functional, pragmatic part of what we do. The vision is really kind of critical. I think what sets us apart from other kinds of clients, and that our facilities represent us, right? Us as a U.S. government, our values, and the best that we have to offer in terms of architecture and engineering. And so they are representative of who we are and what our capabilities are. And then our goals, and these goals are intertwined with everything that we do, is security, resilience, and stewardship. Security is number one. It is the main focus for which we get money. We get about $2.5 billion every year to execute new construction. It's because security is a focus of ours. So that will always be first and foremost, to protect our diplomats overseas. The resilience is one of those things when we are in the markets that we're in for the periods of time that we're in, these buildings have to be durable, adaptable to their environments and sort of new programmatic needs, and they must be sustainable. And that's our charge when we talk about resilience. And stewardship is really about being responsible. We're responsible for the money that we spend, and it's our money, it's taxpayer money, and we're responsible for that portfolio. And so all the kinds of things that we do in our work center around those kinds of goals. Next. So we have been evolving, like all of your organizations, we've been changing. We recognize that the way that we do business today is not going to be the same that it's going to be in the future. And so we're doing things today to make sure that we are competitive moving forward. The first one is really about modernizing. We need to be leaders in this industry, and we are looking to modernize, obviously, the process by which we plan, design, and construct, the people that we hire to do it, and the technology that we utilize to make it more efficient. And so there's a concerted effort on modernizing the kinds of things that we do. We also have to have a vision for what we're going to be doing in the future. And we see that sort of the modernizing part of it, sort of the next 5 to 10 years. And obviously innovating is out to that 25 to 30 years. And that really is talking to futurists, talking to academics, and understanding what are the things that are driving the built environment moving forward, and how does that impact our diplomatic platform? That's the key to understanding how we're going to start moving the needle on our program. And then obviously there's a whole host of research and development that we can do in collaboration with universities and industry to better prepare the State Department for those futures. And then the last part of it is really the kinds of impacts that we make. The platform itself is pretty wonderful representation of our capabilities, but the reality is it's got so much more to that. So we'll talk in more detail about the kinds of effects that we have around economic, environmental, and social. Next. So this is sort of our baseball card of all of our portfolio and sort of all of our statistics. We are in a lot of different locations. That sort of the 290 locations represents about 200 countries. We have a whole host of assets. Most of our assets are overseas, but what you're seeing there is sort of a mix of owned and leased. And what we're looking for there is our goal is to own functional properties and then lease a right mixture of sort of residences, which you see in that sort of other number there. The portfolio, that's just replacement value, so it doesn't include the site. It's a pretty significant portfolio. I would say probably the most impressive international portfolio of any owner. And I think the last thing I would touch on in this slide is these sort of culturally significant objects and artworks. We're pretty special in that, we've been around, or someone has been around responsible for these kinds of facilities since 1790, I think it is. And so we've just acquired things that have increased in value, increased in importance, increased in significance over the time that we've been around. And we literally have very precious facilities for which are important to us because they're on the Secretary of State's Cultural Register, or they're important to the host government. But we also have artwork that we are responsible for maintaining and preserving, which is a wonderful part of all of our assets. Next. So this is kind of all the work that we do. Interestingly enough, like I said, we talked about getting $2.5 billion every year to do this work. 85% of that money goes out to consultants and contractors. So that work gets pushed out to all of you to do this work. And it's really kind of centered around these sort of major programs. The capital security construction program, that's the bulk of our efforts in terms of dollar value. We have about almost $20 billion of workload ongoing that's in design and construction. It's a significant amount of work, and it's going to continue to grow. Major renovations, which is a little modest compared to that, at almost $1 billion. These are really kind of facilities that probably still have some kind of value to us, whether it's sort of historic or it's a recently built building, but we're just renovating it to sort of modernize it. And what we're seeing in that particular program is probably a significant increase in modernization moving forward. We believe at some point you've built the whole entire portfolio, but there's going to be an increase in the demand for renovating older facilities to meet standards that are available today. The compound security upgrades is a really great program that ensures that all of our facilities are able to meet the current security standards, especially for those specific countries that have evolving sort of security environments. So it's ensuring that, you know, what we have the wall, or we have these sort of compound access controls, or whatever those features might be. What's kind of unique about it is that although they're very security driven, because we're talking about walls, they are very much the first impressions of us to the host government and to the city. You know, these walls have a quality to them that can say something positive or negative about us. And so it's a pretty important investment, especially around the way that it represents us. The minor construction improvements, that number is also going to be increasing. We are doing about $350 million of workload. That should be increasing dramatically. The DoD really sees the need to invest a pretty significant amount of your portfolio's value in exactly this kind of stuff. And we're just trying to ramp up that program for ourselves. And then we have sort of the real property leasing and all these different kinds of acquisitions. It's significant. There's another group that does the valuations in terms of the acquisitions, but there's a whole host of other kinds of sort of technical research that we do to make sure that the buildings meet our standards that can be acquired. Next. So as we look forward and what's going on in the program, this is sort of our 6-year outlook of the capital security construction program. And as you can see, they are all over the place, not focused in any kind of geographic region. There are new embassy compounds, there is new consulate compounds, so a mix of different kinds of facilities. And that's really just over the next 6 years. One of the things that was asked of us a while back was the GAO wanted to find out how much longer we had to do on this kind of program. And the investigation that was led by Mangus sort of identified, you know, if we have 290 things and we've done about half of them, we have about 160 locations to go. It's going to be about $60 billion worth of work and take us about 30 years to replace all of those things with new. So in terms of the new capital program, there's a whole lot of work to do. Next. For the major renovations, so there's a whole smattering of here. The scale of this program is really kind of bound by the amount of money that we have for it. I think the way that this is going to move in the future is that we're going to start to see, as our portfolio starts to mature, investments and modernization is going to have to be required. And so I think we're going to start to see this program really start to grow quite a bit more. Next. So a little bit more about what I do, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mangus here in a bit so he can deep dive a little bit more about cost. So I'm one of the functional managing directors, and my portfolio really is around cost management, project management, special project management, and design and engineering with the architects and engineers. And I'm not just saying this because we're talking to you, but cost management is really the most important office that I have. Would you agree, Mangus?
This afternoon, yes, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right, so that's what we do. You can imagine the design engineers are really responsible for, you know, developing policy, developing standards. The project management folks are really taking those standards, working with the architects and engineers to develop the RFP, and then assist on the construction side when it moves out to the field. And then, Mangus, I'll turn it over to you so you can walk through your office.
Okay, next slide, please. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Angel. Just to give an overview, the Office of Cost Management unsurprisingly provides, you know, all cost estimate support for all projects. And as Angel outlined above, we've got a pretty dynamic program, $18 billion in design or construction at any one time, with increments of about $2.6 to $3 billion every year. So it's a pretty comprehensive program. We provide estimating support all projects, whether they range from small construction improvement projects through roof replacements, elevator replacements, right on up into the major capital projects, which I think what we're going to showcase today. We have two major outputs from the office. One is what we call the current working estimate, which is a summary level report that captures all the costs, total project costs for a particular project. So if you take the bottom line on that report, that would be the total funding requirement for that particular project. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail as we move through the slides. The other thing that we're required to do is provide independent government estimates. Any particular project probably has multiple contracts that would be awarded on that project, whether it's for design, value engineering, the construction contract itself, and any other support things. And every one of these things, every one of these contracting actions that's over a $250,000 threshold must have an independent government estimate prepared in support of that contracting action. And the Office of Cost does that. We have about 40 staff at this particular point in time, and we split the world into geographic regions to support the Bureau and the other offices who are similarly organised. And we also run the value engineering studies and the project risk management programme through the Office of Cost Management. So we have a portfolio that starts for early planning right through in support of construction to project completion and sometimes even beyond. We also take part in various initiatives and studies, as Angel mentioned, the projection of the budget that we need going forward over the next 30 years expressed in today's dollars and that type of thing. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea, we are asked a lot of times, why do your projects cost so much? And that's a good question. We have to defend that in a number of ways to a number of different stakeholders in our business. We had a comparative cost study done a couple of years, just to give you some perspective on this. These are sort of comparative costs only, and please don't use these in your next estimate because they're a couple of years old at this point. But if we go into an embassy office building and we back out all the things that we would not have to do if we were building, say, in Washington, D.C. in current situation, we see that probably about 49% of our construction costs are directly related to physical security or technical security or some other management type function that's a direct result of a security requirement. So that if you take these things out, it brings us back. We don't compare too badly to a federal office building or a courthouse for that matter. There's a little delta there, about 10% that we never quite got to the bottom of, but we've explained that as perhaps supply chain issues, logistical costs, or the fact that all our management staff are probably located overseas and we have to pay them subsistence money and various other bits and pieces. So there's a pickup there. But this causes us some challenges. If we go to the next slide, please. What it does for us is it makes a little bit difficult for us when we compile our estimates to use commercial databases, because the construction cost data there is not that relevant to the work that we do. This has been a challenge for us over the last several years, and we are required to do fairly detailed estimates at early stages in the project. As I mentioned before, we do parametric estimates from basic planning, programmatic information, all this kind of stuff. So how do we underpin those estimates, and what kind of cost data do we use? And so what we've done, and this is a work in progress, but it's working quite well for us, we established a couple of years ago our own in-house cost data group. We hired a couple of data analysts and we put a couple of cost managers on that to analyze all the data that we have in-house, synthesize that and try to break that down into some common work breakdown structure that we can then backfeed into the estimates that underpin our cost models and that exist within our cost estimating software. We currently use Sage Timberline with a couple of reporting functions added to that. It's working very well for us. And from that, we've been able to develop 12 basic building types. These are sort of common buildings that we typically have on our embassy compounds or campuses overseas, whether it's the access pavilions, marine security guard quarters, warehouses, that type of thing. And we've developed models that we can then input basic programmatic information that will give us a detailed cost estimating output. We're still refining some of that, but what that does then for us is if we get the planning information at the programmatic level, put that in, get a detailed cost estimate out, even before any design's been done, even before we have a site, we can then allow that estimate to progress through into the design development phase of the project, at which point we can then go in and substitute real components and real systems as they become identified. And so the estimate goes from a planning estimate, as I would describe, into a project estimate fairly seamlessly. and we have ways to deal with puts and takes, and we'll get to the detail of that a little bit more. So that's just to give you a basic oversight of how we would start off a project planning estimate based on historical analysis, programmatic type input, and we come up with an overall budget of what we think that project would cost going forward. We would then escalate that to the projected time when the construction is estimated to start based on the program that we have. We have some futuristic things where we're looking at a digital future, and we're also, and right now we're using programmatic information from the Space Requirements Program. We believe that we can get similar programmatic information directly from BIM. And we'll talk about that a little later on in the program. There's some exciting opportunities, I think, up the road in terms of what we can do for cost estimating from BIM outputs. Next slide, please. Again, back to the data strategy that we had. One of the problems that we've had is data. We don't have good data. Individual cost managers will invent their own workarounds. And so there's a lack of consistency and uniformity across the estimates. This is something that we want to try to eliminate. And so we're working with our cost estimating consultant and with our data group to try and integrate and absorb the data that we've got and put it into useful format. We get, for every single project, milestone estimates from the AEs that go down to uniformat level 4. These things align all over the office in 3-ring binders and PDF format. And the loss to us, we want to try to capture that. So we're putting in place a strategy and a process to get to that so that we can improve the quality of our estimates and be less dependent on what have become expensive commercial databases, which really don't have a whole lot of utility for us. Just a couple of other points I should have made before is that all our projects are US architects, US specs, and US general contractors. All our contracts are denominated in US dollars. So that may give you some idea. There's a tremendous US component to our projects. So we have estimated, and back to Angel's comment about embassy effect, we sometimes find that our facility or our embassy or consulate becomes a kind of economic anchor in that locality and spurs economic growth and supports restaurants, coffee shops, and all that kind of stuff. In addition to that, we estimate that about 20 to 33% of the total project cost is a direct investment into the host country, which is a fairly good diplomatic message for us to send, but it's also 60, 70% of the value of our taxpayers' dollars is actually coming back to the US and has been spent with consultants and architects and suppliers and contractors and others who work to support our projects. So just a point to bear in mind. Okay, next, please. I think it's back to you, Angel. Yeah.
So this is, we're going to start walking you through one of our case studies, which is in Matamoros, but wanted to share with you all the work that's kind of ongoing in Mexico. And what you can see by the sort of list on the left is that it's all happening in parallel, right? All of these, the embassy and all the consulates are all kind of happening at the same time. We're investing over $1.5 billion in Mexico, which is obviously a significant sum for anybody. One of the things that we learned about that was we need to think differently about the way that we execute our work. And if we start to see scenarios like this, where we're going to be in one country doing a lot of work at the same time, we need to start developing an approach so that we better understand how to do that, because otherwise we can be competing against ourselves in construction, right? So one of the things that we've done from this is we've actually developed what's called a country plan, not only to better understand how do we develop all these different kinds of locations, but then really figure out ways to work with the host government so that we can better leverage all that investment and get the kinds of, get the kinds of things that we need in order to develop at those particular locations. Next. So this is Matamoros. It was just completed recently. It's on a relatively decent sized site, about 7.7 acres. It just was executed by Richard Bauer, now called Richard Kennedy, construction by B.L. Harbert, and the architect is Page. And one thing to note here is a lot of our projects, this one in particular, is done design build with bridging. So that's kind of our default delivery method. What we believe is that we need a whole variety of different kinds of delivery methods to satisfy the program. And so we do a whole lot of different kinds of things. We do design but build when it's necessary. We do, CM at risk. We do straight design build. And so there's a whole variety of different kinds of delivery methods. It's really about understanding which delivery method is most appropriate for that particular location. And then I think one of the questions we typically get when we talk about our program is, well, how do you start? How do you know which ones to do? And so we work with a sister bureau of ours named Diplomatic Security, and they do this really kind of exhaustive kind of risk analysis to identify which of all the posts in the world are kind of most vulnerable. And then we weave that information along with information about the facility condition, about the scale, about life safety kinds of things. And then we develop the sort of top 80 list that identifies, here's the ones you really need to replace because they're probably the most vulnerable. And so that's what's called the top 80. That's kind of what generates this. So what ends up happening is that this post gets on the top 80, and then it allows us to spend the money from the sort of capital security construction program. Next. So obviously when we do these things, it's about buying the right kind of site. And when we started out a long time ago in the early 2000s, the director at the time said, you can't spend more than $10 million. And I need you to buy 10 acres every single time. You can imagine 10 acres in the middle of Africa, probably pretty easy. 10 acres in London, really, really hard. And the price points are wildly different. And what ended up happening with that particular direction, 10 acres for 10 million, no more than 10 million, we were out in the suburbs. So this is really about finding the right place for the diplomatic mission to execute its business. And it's getting just harder and harder to do because we're in these kinds of mega cities, which are getting tougher to do. So a part of this process of identifying the right site is really understanding, what's the climate like, what's the environment like, what's the security like, public transportation, how close are we to the municipality, all those kinds of things. There's a whole host of due diligence that's done associated with selecting a site because it's a major investment for us for the next 50, 80, 100 years. That includes a facet of the work that Magnus's shop does, which is about sort of doing business in that particular country and in that particular city. What are the planning things? How much does cost? How much do things cost? What are the sort of shipping and logistic challenges? All that kind of stuff. The picture on the left sort of shows kind of where it's located in Matamoros. It's kind of surrounded by the Rio Grande, and the Rio Grande floods. And so this whole city of Matamoros actually floods. So we actually had to raise the entire site by a meter or two so we could provide that extra sort of freeboard. Next. And then this is really about the neighborhood. As you can see, we're just right across the river to the United States. So understanding the neighborhood, the context is critical for us to really design the right kind of project. So that's really kind of understanding the security, the site and the environment associated with it. And then interestingly, it's really kind of understanding the culture. When we're using Western people to design and using Western people to construct, we miss these sort of things that are happening with culture and subculture and the way that they behave and the different kinds of rituals that they all have. People use buildings differently than Westerners do. And so we have to sort of understand that to provide a building that's more appropriate for its location, more intuitive. And the reason being is that when we build these buildings, it's not all Americans. It's actually not even all State Department. Typically an embassy and a consulate is 50% state and then 50% other. And that other is made up of like DOD or DOJ or something like that. 75% of the people that work there, they're local staff. 95% of the people that work there are also local staff. So we are part of that neighborhood and we're a part of that community. This building is there to serve them, but it also has to represent us. Next. Yeah,
once we've selected a site, then things start to get a little serious for us. When we go forward to purchase a site, we have to go to Congress and we tell them we want to get X millions of dollars to buy a site in a specific location for a specific project. And at that time, we have to tell them what the total costs of that project are. And so if you'll bear in mind that at this point, we only have programmatic information, we have no design, we haven't really done any technical due diligence. And so it's pretty important that we make a decent job of trying to assess what this project's really going to cost. So once we go forward with that, we prepare a CWE. As I mentioned before, that's an estimate, a summary level report of all total project costs. So we're telling Congress once we buy this site and we give them a brief description of the project, usually it's a population, it's for so many staff, and it's, you know, functional, this, that, and the next thing. So they get an idea. And typically what happens, once that cat's out the bag, pretty much that becomes the budget. We do not like to go back and tell them, oh, by the way, we made a mistake. We have to come back and ask you for more, unless there's a really, really good reason. So as I mentioned before, we put together the CWE, the basis of the estimate, the space requirements program, and standard assumptions based on historical cost analysis that we've done, a reflection of our current standards. We also have a planning contingency matrix that we use to help us to get through the design development phase, and I'll come back to that a little later in the slide show to show you how that draws down over time. Next slide, please. This is the typical work breakdown structure of the CWE that we would send in support of a congressional notification that accompanies the project all the way through. It's pretty linear, and it roughly follows the sort of logic of the delivery process. We do the site acquisition, project development, then we go into design. Once design's complete, or bridging in this case, we award a design build contract. We may have other construction costs, telephones, utility connections that are performed by others other than the primary contractor. We have a planning contingency, which we would use to get us through project development. And then we have a construction contingency, which we hand off to our construction arm once it goes into project execution. We may have value added tax that we have to pay. And we also have project supervision, construction security. We have to furnish the building. And then there's a small allowance for art and embassies that allows our cultural heritage group to go and acquire appropriate artwork to display in the finished facility. And the bottom line, the total, is the total request for funds that we ask in Congress to give us. Once that's approved, then we go forward, and then we're going to move into the development of the concepts. Next slide, please. Again, the CWE has categorized by different levels based on the certainty and the quality of the information that's used to produce it. So it starts off at the basic planning level from preliminary planning information, space requirements, and it moves up right through up to level 4, which is the complete bridging design or complete design if it were a design build or design bid build, which is pretty much at the time that the contract's awarded. Everything follows through. So we're tracking the costs all the way through the different CWEs, reconciling the differences. We get the check estimates in from the architectural team, and we're trying to keep the project on track all the way through, and we track that and report on that to our management and beyond if necessary. Next. So once we've got the site selected, we've notified Congress, we buy the site. The next thing, we move into technical due diligence. Our teams of design group and our OBO-led project management teams with the cost manager will go to site and perform what's called the project development survey. We're starting to look at how we're going to accommodate the program onto the site. We begin the technical due diligence, soils reports, utility connections, and all those other things. We're also doing an early evaluation of the risks, both economic and political. They'll be looking at logistics, execution type impediments, perhaps. Political risks in terms of, can we get visas in there? What's the state of the local workforce? What's the availability of materials? Is there enough space on the site to accommodate laydown and all that type of thing? And from all of these things, we start to formulate what we call the design to budget. And we're going to get ready to go with the architect or the architectural team and develop 3 concepts, of one of which we will pick, and we will give him a target cost that we want him to constrain the design to fit within. And so we're moving on now. That's it. Next. Back to you, Angel.
Yep. So when we kick off designs, there's always overarching OBO goals, and we've talked about that in the beginning, sort of security, resilience, and stewardship. And then there's sort of project-specific goals, really kind of based upon what's happening there in that particular location. In this case, we knew that the environment was actually pretty harsh. We talked about having to add freeboard. It's super crazy hot there, so it's pretty oppressive in the summertime. In this case, we needed to understand the capabilities of post. So even though it's really close to the border, the skill set at that particular location is a little bit different, and the logistics are just a little bit different. So we need to understand exactly what was possible for that particular location. And then in this, in Matamoros, there's a huge consular operation. So we need to figure out a way to sort of decompress that and spread that out so that we didn't have all these people sort of, hard charging the access control facilities. And then, right next to our site is a park. And there was an opportunity to sort of leverage some of the space there so that you can start to sequence people in. So that's kind of the sort of project specific goals by which we kind of looked at it. And this is kind of, what Megan's sort of talking about when we started developing all those estimates is this is about the time that we're starting to hire all of our architects and engineers that are going to be developing the design build documents. Next. So Megan's talked about sort of that 3 concept section for Matamoros. This is what those were. The first one was really organized around landscapes. So you had these sort of landscape spaces with the buildings kind of around it. The one on the right, scheme 3, was really about having sort of a main sort of object building with all of that kind of space around it. These are a little simplified in terms of diagram, but the gist is that what we're looking for is 3 different ways of solving the sort of project challenges on that site. And then there's the second one is this sort of, again, a little bit of an object building, but using a sort of device to provide all this kind of shade. This is actually one of the first instances where we're starting to use what's called the Industry Advisory Review. That's a group of it's an industry advisory group made up of about 35 industry professionals from a variety of different kinds of technical disciplines to help advise on the evolution of the project. And we bring them in at this sort of first phase to take a cut on what they are seeing from their professional perspective on how to evolve the project. So it is meeting sort of all of our sort of overall OBO overarching goals and those project specific goals. Next. And then obviously we start to settle in on one. In this particular case, we settle in that scheme 2. It's described as the sort of this latia, which is that sort of sunscreen that provides that shelter above. This is kind of the point where we are starting to look at the AE is starting to get in more detail, right? There's some more refinement on the sort of major security mitigations, especially on physical security, the major site moves. We're looking at, sort of the bigger infrastructure decisions and all the sort of big things that impact the massing and the blocking and stacking. And that's kind of what this sort of second evolution is. We're also starting to look at facade a little bit more, sort of diving deep a little bit more. And then the other thing that happens in sort of parallel to the industry advisory reviews is what's called the senior management review. So what that is really kind of all the office directors, managing directors, and of course the director of the bureau together in one meeting to better understand the project and provide advice and guidance on things that they are seeing from their senior perspective. So at the same time, there's a design review by the technical staff. There is the senior leadership review just to make sure that we're setting the right course for ourselves. Next.
That's back to me. So once they've selected the preferred concept, sometimes there's a little few puts and takes, as Angel mentioned. The Industry Advisory Review Board may make some suggestions to incorporate various pieces, perhaps from one concept into another, and come up with the sort of final accepted design that they want to proceed with. So at that point, we may make some adjustments to the design to budget. These tend to be fairly minimal, but at that point, we're going to go forward with a design to budget issued to the architect who's developing the budgeting documents. And then he then is required to submit milestone estimates as the design develops to confirm, in fact, that he's still on budget. That we do this for this particular case on Matamoros, the design to budget was set at $120.4 million. So the construction contract ultimately awarded for 116.3, which was the lowest of 3 bids that ranged from 116 and one out there at 145. So we were quite close, but we didn't, at this point, we haven't taken into account the contribution that was made by the value engineering study, and we'll get to that in the next slide. So this project turned out quite well for us. So if we go to the next slide, please. OBO's got a pretty robust value engineering system. We've had that on the go since 1987. We've conducted something like 500 plus value engineering studies, and over that time frame, we've booked $1.2 billion in cost avoidance or cost savings. So that averages out about $32 million or $35 million rather a year at a cost to us of a total cost of about 32 million. So the value engineering program is returning to us $37 for every dollar spent. So it's doing its job. On the Matamoros project, we had 31 recommendations, 9 of which were accepted for a value of $2.1 million. So if we apply that $2.1 million rather to the design to budget, that would suggest to us that we should expect the bids to come in at 118.3, and the final award went for 116.3 with the second guy at 119. So I don't know if we can take all the credit for that through the value engineering, but we think it contributed something. So we use that. It's mandated. We have a good program, and we're also trying to help other bureaus within the Department of State to set up their own value engineering program. So we tend to be a leader, I think, within the department for that. I know that there's many of you out there in the audience who perhaps participated in these facilitated VE studies that we have. In 2016, we introduced a risk management program that runs similarly to the VE program. It's a facilitated program. It would take those items that we identified at the project development survey, and now we're sort of through concept into bridging development and start to look at that and come up to validate or develop mitigating strategies for all the risks identified, to quantify those and to understand what it means to the project and how we should best cope with those. And some of that stuff will be booked into the estimate for either contingency planning or sums of money allocated to take care of these things should these risks actually materialize. The risk register follows the project all the way through. So it's something that we constantly update. And we also, well, I'll come to that in a minute. Next slide, please. The value engineering system, we follow the SAVE process, the Society of American Value Engineers steps process. We bring together teams. We may customize the teams to address particular issues that we've identified on particular projects. If we're looking to take care of something at the site or we're looking to do something with the facade, we may seek subject matter experts for those particular components to compose the team that we use to help us to come up with the solutions that we want. So there's some flexibility built in there. And then we look at these things on a life cycle cost basis to see, there may be some higher initial cost perhaps that accrues life cycle cost that isn't for the benefit of the project. Angel mentioned a little bit about our attention to climate crisis issues and resiliency. So these kind of recommendations are starting to become more important than perhaps they were a couple of years ago. We pay attention to that. Next slide, please. The risk management program, it follows a scaled approach. So the level of effort's kind of dictated by the size of the project and what we think the opportunities are for that. We've gotten a lot out of this risk management process. We've done a lot of work particularly on phased projects or projects that have challenging execution type plans. And we like to run these by subject matter experts who can help us validate or challenge some of the assumptions that we made of how we deliver the project. In fact, I was involved in a major capital project a year or two ago where we got a risk management team in to take a look at that. And the decision to renovate an existing building in a downtown location in a European capital was abandoned. Not abandoned, but it was changed to we'd be better off to go and get a greenfield site or a brownfield site someplace else and build a new embassy, because the identification and the subject matter expert input that we got from that study changed that decision, because the costs and the schedule impacts were far greater than had been first calculated. So there is a lot of value in that. It's relatively new, and we also use it. We have a pilot now. Pretty much when our projects are handed off into construction, we facilitate another risk management workshop, and we bring in the construction team who are going to go and execute in the field. And we found that to be extremely valuable in terms of communicating the project to the team and the risks and challenges that they may face, and also allow them the opportunity to add to the risk register challenges and risks that they themselves see as a result of that workshop. So this is something that we're continuing to develop and use to our advantage. Next. Again, this is just a circular diagram. You've identified the risk, we do the analysis, we calculate what the response is, we monitor and control, and we check and adjust as we go through. So it's pretty much, an explanation of the life cycle of the risk register. So it's, I think I mentioned that, and then also the pilot program. So that would require a combination of OBO core project team members and facilitated and supported by AE and risk professionals who would come in on the team to help us to understand and review the identified risks and to look at the documents and see if there's any other things that we might have missed. Next. Back to Angel.
So obviously the process moves forward. We end up, awarding, putting out the RFP and awarding the construction contract. And this is really kind of the result. So, some of the features here, it's really like one of the things I love about Metamorphosis is actually a relatively simple building. It's really just a box with this shade structure on it. But it's simple, but it's not simplistic, right? It provides this sort of performative type of qualities in terms of keeping the sun off the building and reducing sort of our energy demand by a pretty significant amount. And it then starts to add increased functionality for that exterior space that typically would go unused. Now, because it has shelter, it has become much more functional, especially when you're talking about consular visitors coming to visit, diplomats coming to visit. You're able to actually host events outside because of the structure. And this one gesture, this one sort of simple gesture of the awning really becomes the performative, functional, and the sort of civic gesture for the consulate. It's a wonderful little building, pretty modest price point considering, having to build this in a different kind of country. But you can see here, it's a really kind of wonderful building. Next slide. And part of what makes these things kind of work is the way that we really kind of push the AEs to use materials consistently, using design elements consistently throughout the project so that we're getting a lot more bang for our buck. So if we're going to pay for it, let's pay for it and get a little bit of mileage out of it. In this case, you'll see how that sort of the material and the sort of vocabulary around that canopy sort of moves into the interior space and starts to define the ceilings for some of the office spaces, some of the gallery spaces. Same thing with the exterior limestone. This coral limestone is used on the outside, but also weaves its way into the inside of the building to sort of give you this sort of inside outside kind of thing, but it also provides double duty for us in that from a maintenance perspective, this building is pretty crazy robust. And so the maintenance demands of these buildings are really low. When we're looking at 80% of the cost being after ribbon cutting, we need to ensure that these buildings are very, very durable. And the more materials you drop onto a project, the more you're going to have to store somewhere to make sure that you're able to replace it. And so this architect actually was able to leverage the right kinds of materials, use them in multiple locations, and get a lot of sort of mileage out of it. Next slide. The other thing that this project does well is really start creating multifunctional spaces. Frankly, we don't know what this building is going to need in the next 10, 15, 20, 50 years. So it needs to be able to adapt within this sort of fixed envelope and be able to expand and contract within the sort of perimeter of the building. And so what the architect has done in this, and what we really request for all of our architects, is that we provide spaces that are multifunctional. So in this particular case in the gallery, day to day, this probably functions more like social gathering space, a place to eat. The servery is just off to the right there in the back, but it's really kind of a social hub for the building. But it doubles for event space. It can be a place where we can host a town hall because of the scale. We need those kinds of spaces just because we don't know exactly the future of these these posts. So they need to be future-proofed in a way. And that's really done by providing all sort of multifunctional, multi-use kinds of spaces and materials. Next. The landscape really starts to set this tone for what it's like going to be on the consulate. So this is really kind of one of the first impressions that you get. So you have the perimeter wall, you start to have this landscape. And in this case, we're using native plantings because they're resilient in that particular location. They're drought tolerant. They require very little maintenance. That's a big deal for us. And funny story, that image on the far left, which is actually, it actually attracts monarch butterflies and these other kind of migratory species, but it has to grow. But in Mexico, it's actually perceived to be a little bit of a nuisance. And so when the facilities people came here, they started mowing this down, trying to maintain it, and it really needed to grow. And so we had to sort of tell them, hey, don't cut that stuff. You have to let it grow. And once we did, then you start to see the sort of benefits of that kind of wild plantings, which is all the kind of monarch butterflies. And then, obviously what we're using stuff to actually reduce the maintenance at those for the landscapes. Next. Art is a pretty significant deal. I actually put it up there with the building and kind of the first ways that we communicate with the host city and the host government without ever sort of speaking the language or having any kind of engagement. This becomes that sort of first cross-cultural dialogue with each other, right? The art and the architecture. And in this particular case, and in all of our embassies and consulates, frankly, is that it really is a mix between architects that we export, American architects that we export, and then the importing of different kinds of local artists. And it's really a way for us to start to engage the diplomats, start to educate the visitors on what's important for both of our countries, and really just inspire everybody. Next. And I think we talked a little bit of some of the sustainability features. There's a whole bunch of things here, but the big things that we're trying to do on sustainability is really reduce energy and water. That's a really big thing. And what you're seeing here is we're reducing water by 40% over sort of LEED baseline. We're actually powering the entire campus, 13% of the campus with the PV that we've done here. PV is a big player for us. We're moving harder into that arena. We've actually done some net zero energy projects in the Pacific. We're going to be pushing that pretty hard, especially with what the White House executive order has been. We are going to be pushing to sort of reduce our needs and increase our capacities around energy and water. And then it's actually, I think we actually LEED Gold. This might be an older slide, but the LEED rating is a little bit of a scorecard, but our big goal is to really ensure that we're providing the right kinds of features for those specific kinds of locations. We don't want to get points. Points aren't important for us, but what we want is these buildings to perform and function in the right kinds of way. Next. So this is really just kind of a summary slide of kind of what we talked about. Those cities, those sites, they start to drive a lot of design, right? So you have the sort of program, you have the sort of site, and they come together, and it's really about adapting to that particular environment and the kind of demands that it has, and managing the precious resources in that particular country. And I think when we focus on performance and functionality of our embassies and consulates, what is born out of that is the aesthetics. And that's really true for Matamoros. The goal was to satisfy, minimize all that sort of heat gain. But from that, we really got this civic gesture, and it really is the sort of aesthetic value of the concept. Next. So like all construction, we have sort of challenges. Construction has challenges. Ours are very, very similar to them. A couple of unique ones is, when we're all in with these different kinds of host governments, they just have different kinds of processes, approaches, labor hours. It just varies. When we are typically working 60 hours in the field, and in some places they don't allow you to work more than 40. And that's a big problem for us, or the kind of permitting process or whatever. Those become challenges. Obviously, in these different countries, currency fluctuations is a concern, and sort of productivity is always going to be an issue. One of the things that we do is that we are hiring an American to do the work, especially that classified work. And we may use local labor. We do actually use a lot of local labor, but we use them with supervision, American supervision, so that to ensure that that they're doing the work in the right kind of way, not only from a quality perspective, but also from a security perspective. Next. Security is one of those things that's very unique for us. What you're seeing here is really kind of pictures of the sort of different kinds of things that are unique about our projects. You see folks having to line up and queue for the iris scan, for the walkthrough metal detector. We have that. The pictures on the right are having to manage access to the site from all the trucks through these different kinds of access control facilities to ensure that everything is on the up and up, inspecting all the materials, and then even creating secure warehouses so those materials can be stored until they're needed. Next. And this is just some construction photos. I think the one thing I would add here is how it's kind of evolving for us. Right now, it is a lot of construction in the field. We do a lot of stuff on site. And one of the things that we're changing to is really kind of looking at moving from construction to assembling on site. And what that really means is really manufacturing more stuff on site, and then it really just using different kinds of labor to assemble these pieces on site. I think that does a few things for us, and obviously the quality increase. We believe that we're going to see some schedule savings. We believe we'll see some cost savings, but more in the schedule and quality realm. So that's important for us. The other thing I think is really great for us is if we're able to move more into the sort of offsite manufacturing, we could be in a place where we're doing more to impact the American economy versus the economies in these other kinds of locations. You know, one of the things that Mingus had highlighted is the significant percentage of work that's being done out in the field. You bring a big percentage of that back home. I think that's really good for us as a country. So it's one of the things that we're really kind of investigating. Mingus is actually heading up some research that we're doing on offsite manufacturing. I think if you're doing residences, it's quite a bit easier. I think when you're doing embassies and consulates, it's a lot more challenging, and that's kind of what he's investigating with his team. Next. And I think where we've seen success, especially in Matamoros, has been our ability to work together. It is a partnership. No one's in this thing by themselves. It really is how all of us kind of work together. It's OBO, it's the consultant, it's the construction contractor, and it's also Post. Post has a big say in all these things. The ability for all of those people to work together effectively is key to the success of the project. And that's actually one of the things that has made Matamoros one of our really successful projects, is that we had a great team at headquarters, great team in the field, and a great team at Post. Next. And our success has been recognized in a variety of different ways. We get ENR Global Best Projects. We got an AIA Phoenix Metro Award. That's where Richard and Kennedy are, and it was nominated for an AIA Design Award. So what's nice is that the work that we are all doing for this program is being recognized, and it's being recognized by the best associations in the country. And so it's nice to know that what we're doing is right. Next. This slide, actually, I think it says the most. When you can't really tell the difference between the rendering and the building, we've done a pretty good job. And this building is a wonderful building. It really exceeded our expectations around security, around resilience, and stewardship, and is really a great example of what we can do when we all kind of work together. Next. So as we've been doing this work, we're constantly looking to improve. And that really includes sort of modernizing the way that we do our work. And a few of the examples of that is really pushing standardization. That's a big thing for us. What we recognize is that from embassy to embassy and consulate to consulate, there are specific features that are the same. They should be replicated. We should be reducing the need for an architect and engineer to redesign that. So it gets us better cost predictability. We can better prescribe what's specifically needed that for location, and then use architecture engineers for what they really need to do, is really solve problems that aren't part of our standards. So that's something that we're executing in a pretty significant way now. This rapid engineering construction is really an effort for us. Like for the federal government, we have a sort of reduced kind of civil service workforce. So we're leaning on industry to sort of help us do more of our work. And that's what this REC program really is. It is working with small businesses to plan, design, and construct that project with very little touch points from OBO. And so for a lot of our smaller projects, we've been doing this now for a little bit. It seems to be really successful. Whether or not we're able to scale it for different project types, that's what we're going to be looking into, but a real wonderful kind of program that just got kicked off a couple of years ago. And then we need to be better leveraging technology and data in the right kind of way. And that's kind of what we're working towards now is we have a lot of data. It's not accessible in the right kinds of ways. So we're working towards that. And then one of the things that Mingus is heading up is sort of project performance management, is ensuring that we understand exactly the right kinds of triggers that require our intervention, so that we're looking at KPIs, we're looking at the right kinds of metrics to understand the health of our projects. And then when there is a need for intervention, we're able to do it early enough so that we don't all suffer, and that we can manage it within the appropriate budget. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Angel. No, as Angel mentioned, we're very interested in the potential for us of off-site manufacturing, off-site construction, modularisation, or whatever. We see some benefits to that. One, there's a transference of risk for quality and schedule from, say, a third world construction site to an automated factory somewhere that's got a lot more control over the environment and the quality of the work. So there's some advantages there. Also, time at site is very, very expensive for us. So we can knock time off the schedule. That's a big, big savings. We don't have to deploy lots of people and have a big footprint in a country where there may be, you know, depending where it is, some risk from whatever. And then looking forward to a post-COVID world, what long-term impacts will this be in terms of third countries' willingness to grant visas to people from someplace else, and or people's willingness to travel, or the costs associated to incentivize them. So we're looking seriously at that. But in track with that, what does all that mean for our processes in terms of cost estimating, scheduling, and all these other stuff? We're looking, our efforts so far have been focused primarily in the residential, because that's where we get what we see as the repeatability. And to get the scale, we'd probably have to do some kind of procurement contracting at the programmatic level rather than a project-by-project basis to get the true advantages. Not sure we're quite solved that yet, but we're taking a look at that, and we have working groups, and we're, you know, consulting with academics and various other outside parties to help us to develop some kind of strategic vision for that. In parallel to that, at a more basic level, in terms of our cost estimating platforms, we're working hard to integrate this direct outputs from the Space Requirement Programme into the detailed cost estimates. We're looking very seriously at what we can get from our BIM development. We are encouraged by the fact that we can get the same output from BIM that we get from a Space Requirements Programme. We should be able to produce estimates directly from those BIM outputs. And that's something that we're working with our software consultant. He's confident we can do that. Again, I don't think OBO's BIM effort or initiative is there yet, but we in cost are trying to make sure that we don't get left behind when that does happen, that we're in a position to take full advantage of that. We're also, renovation projects are a big challenge for us. We tend to have low bidder interest in these things, wide bid disparity in terms of the pricing we receive, and they're hugely risky for all associated with them. And so we're trying to find ways to try and do a better job of those. And also with change management and reporting, we made some progress on that. It tends to be that we have a fairly dynamic program. Things change quickly. Everybody understands what's happening at the time, but 6 months or 12 months later, when somebody asks the questions, well, we can't really tell the story. So we want to automate that to the fullest extent possible. And we have some programs in place now that help us to do that. We also want to integrate the OE, the AE, and contractor estimates into our software. So we're looking at a way to have standard templates and perhaps prescribe what kind of software we want you to use when you're doing our projects. Next slide, please. This is just back to the renovation thing. What we're looking at is perhaps a work breakdown structure that aligns with these projects. We don't know whether parametric, depending on the intensity of the work, maybe one way to go. Perhaps if we break it down into work packages, might be more accurate. And again, with data of what these things actually caused. It's difficult for us to do these estimates at the early planning stage before the scope of work's really been developed. And even at that, I think there's a lot of issues with productivity and risk that contractors price into that. As I mentioned before, we get huge disparities in the proposals and possibly one and maybe only even two bids on some of these projects. So that's a challenge for us. So we're looking to find a better way to manage those projects. Next slide, please. I mentioned the change management. We have some reporting software applications now that are helping us with that. In fact, I had occasion to use 2 of these this morning. It seems to be working quite well. So that's an internal thing mostly. We don't really need to involve outside people with that. Next slide, please. This is the thing that we've been working on for a couple of years to try and get the AE and the consultant estimates to integrate with a common work breakdown structure, and to give us estimates in a soft electronic file that we would then take ownership. It allows us to do the reconciliation process a lot quicker. It also allows us to collect, I think I'd mentioned before about these 3-ring binders with the PDFs, where I've got all sorts of valuable cost information that we just don't get a chance to harvest and save. This would allow us to do that. We'd allow to reconcile these estimates, compare them to other estimates, and develop our database with our own in-house data group. And those costs, or however we decide to analyse that, would then go back into the estimates that underpin the cost models for the basic building types that we described earlier. So we're making some progress with that, and we're keen to develop that more. It would allow us to produce accurate estimates more reliably, quicker, and perhaps even with staff who are perhaps not as experienced as some of the others, and that's a big plus for us. Next, I think that's it for me. Yeah.
So all the work that we do is done with, at least in these kind of phases, done with a variety of different kinds of architects and engineers. So, and we use this sort of IDIQ system in order to acquire those services. And so what you're seeing here is a list of the current design IDIQ firms and the support services IDIQ firms. And what you should be recognizing right away is a variety of different kinds of scales, right? So we have big and small firms. There's a lot of regional diversity in this on this mix too. Next slide. And then this is a list. The support services one was just recompeted. So these are the folks that are a part of the short list. They're in the process now of reviewing these and making a selection. Next. And so what we talked about in the beginning, we're going to close with, so there's only a handful of slides left, is really about the sort of embassy effect. So beyond providing the platform, there are these kinds of effects because we've built that building. Next. The first one is really about the economic effect. And it is the thing that Megan sort of talked about. 25 to 35% of our construction costs are directly put into that local city. And that's a significant amount of money, and it changes a lot of things. And so we're investing in these cities in pretty significant kinds of ways. And businesses start to develop the way that Megan's described, that are popping up in London in particular. This is what those images are. That's kind of 9 elms before, 9 elms after. And everything in this part of town is Embassy Diner, Embassy Donuts, Embassy Cleaners, all that stuff, because we legitimized development in that country. We were the anchor tenant. We inspired people to come here. And so now there's a whole host of different kinds of embassies that are out there. Apple's out there, a whole lot of different kinds of stuff. Lots of residences popped up. But because we were there, a lot of people started to show up. And then it also helps to increase real estate value. So if we can go into a market and start to share with people, we're going to invest pretty significantly in your country. Businesses are going to thrive because we're here, and real estate values will increase. It's hard to say no to that kind of opportunity. Next. And so this is kind of what we talked about with resilience. These are before pictures, not after pictures, but it's about these buildings being durable, 50 to 80-year buildings, that they'd be adaptable to a whole variety of different kinds of futures. It's really a variety of different kinds of environments, and they have to be sustainable. They have to consume less and produce more. That's just, it's really kind of as simple as that. We need to be good neighbors, but we also can put our situation where we're independent of that host government and not reliant on them for energy and water, if that's something that we can manage ourselves. Next. And then the social effect, which I think is the most important one, is really about the kinds of things that we change with the people that are coming to engage in our facilities. And a lot of the places that we work, we're making sure that we're not taxing the sort of stormwater systems. We're providing electrical substations for us, but the city or the neighborhood benefits. We do roads, we do those kinds of things. So there's already these kinds of infrastructure benefits just for us being there. In addition to that, we actually provide a whole variety of public amenities. In some cases, like in Milan, we renovated this historic building so that the citizens of Milan could use it. We did that. And in London, we have this public park. In Rio, we have this sort of public promenade. But those are public gestures that the American government is providing that city because we're a part of it, right? And then there's this whole host of sort of cultural technical exchange. We talked about the art, we talked about the architecture. we actually do a lot of training. We're training people how to not only build these things, but also how to maintain them. And in a lot of different places, that's a skill that's not there. Imagine you could be teaching someone a very valuable construction skill and change the trajectory of their family because you provide them that particular skill. Actually, one of our contractors has this wonderful story where they hired this person to work construction with them on a particular project. That person has now been all around the world for the last 20 years doing embassy construction work for them that they would never have had that opportunity to do if we didn't have this kind of program. And then humanitarian assistance is pretty significant. We never plan for our buildings to do it, but because they're so resilient. In Haiti, we finished the embassy in Haiti, and then a year after the major earthquake, and one of the only buildings remaining was ours. And not only standing, but functioning very effectively. And so we're providing, a building that was kind of designed to house a couple hundred people is then now home for 600 people to live and sleep and provide humanitarian assistance for all these people in the city. That's amazing. That's the first, the first impression someone gets of the U.S. government is we're handing them a blanket, we're handing them food, we're handing them water. That's pretty cool. We have this one story where we have a contractor did a really modest compound security upgrade just to upgrade the lighting. It's the Juba actually. And when we introduced this new lighting project, what they observed was all these kids coming to the embassy to do their homework. So they're all just sitting around the embassy wall because it's the only place where they can have consistent light and power. That's their introduction to the United States. It's pretty amazing. It's overwhelming to think that that's what we're a part of. I always thought we just did buildings, and we don't. We really impact the lives of every citizen that's in and around our embassies and consulates. Next. So, we have done a lot to make sure that you know how to get in touch with us, make sure that you're able to engage with us. And so there's a whole host of social media, different kinds of websites and email addresses you can get to. We're going to a whole bunch of other associations and doing a bunch of different kinds of events, and they're kind of up here on the right. I know we're coming back to see you guys in June. And so, Mangus, I think we're going to do a better job of redoing the show and maybe adding a little more color or something to it. But we'll do this again, and we'll probably add some different kinds of things for the folks that might come back. Next. And then I'm going to close on this slide. It's really kind of the big point, right? That the world is changing. It's more complicated than ever, and we need the best and brightest to work, not only with us inside OBO, but alongside us as consultants and contractors. And that's kind of what the spirit of this quote is. It's important, right? It's an opportunity to give back to a country that literally has given me a lot. And it's a way for, I think, all of us to participate in public service and sort of contribute our best skill sets into, I think, a very wonderful program that best represents us as government and as a people. That's it. What we could do is take some questions for however many have come up. See, Meg, this is what I told you. We might have done so good, there's no questions at all.
Well, there's always questions come with good presentations. We have a couple of them on chat bar. I'm going to read them one by one. The first one was posted by Carlos. It says, will it be possible to have a copy of the presentations?
The answer is yes, Carlos. You get a copy of the presentation. I saw Carlos in the participant list. So yeah, no worries.
All righty. The second one is from Chowdhury. What factors are taken into consideration while deciding how the consulate embassy appears? Does local culture play a part in the architectural design? And if so, how do you estimate those costs?
Yeah, the local culture always plays a role. And the reason being is the people in that location have figured out how to survive in those countries, and they do very specific kinds of things to do so. So in Matamoros, that screen, that's actually a very local vocabulary. It's just a shelter, but it's called a LATIA screen. It does exactly what it's supposed to do, just keep the sun off the building. So they took that kind of vocabulary and Americanized it to provide that kind of the sort of performative kinds of things. Now, the estimating part of it is when we first started out, one of the things that Mingus sort of described in the beginning was when we buy the site, we were asked by Congress to tell them how much it's going to cost. And you can imagine we don't have any information at the time. We haven't picked an architect or we haven't have a design. You know what I mean? We are gathering some information, but we are speculating on the cost. And one of the things that Mingus talks about a lot, and I like, is he's charged with predicting what the market will charge us for that particular project. That's kind of what he does. And so it's hard. It's hard to kind of figure it out. And so as we start to move into the design process, that's when Mangus's team and AE's cost estimator are really working together to better understand the costs of each of those specific features. Mangus, did you want to add anything to what I said, or maybe correct me if I made a mistake?
No. Just to add, the design to budget that we develop, we're now starting to give these design to budgets broken down by uniform level 1 breakdown. So to answer the question there about the exterior facade, there would be a sum of money allocated for that, within which the designer would be expected to constrain his design to fit. If that wasn't possible, then we would have a conversation about it and make necessary adjustments to, if that was in the best interest of the project. So he would be expected to come up and comply with all of those requirements for a particular budget, a subset of the major design to budget.
Question answered.
I don't know, is it?
Thank you for the answers. It was very good. Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. Very good job on the presentation.
Thank you.
Right. The next one is from Paul. Which departments were involved in the Moscow embassy fiasco?
Yeah, I saw that question in the chat as it popped up. So what's funny about that one is that, obviously it was actually an old organization of ours called FBO, the Foreign Buildings Office, before it became a bureau. And one of the things that was being done at that time was really trying to execute this work the way that everybody does construction work, which is hire locals to do the projects. And in that particular case, we hired locals and they did things, right, that they shouldn't have. And what it did was actually set a foundation for how we needed to change the way that we did our work. And what we realized at that time is if we want things to be secure, we have to do it ourselves. And so we hire American contractors that have certain kinds of security clearances, in some cases top secret security clearances, to ensure that the kind of construction that we need is being done. When we're using local folks, we'll have cleared American guards, or we'll have technicians that are also cleared to observe, to make sure that nothing's getting put in the building that we don't want. So it's changed a lot of the way that OBO does its work. It also changed a lot of the way that diplomatic security provides their work. So on each one of our construction projects, we have what's called a site security manager. That's the diplomatic security representative that is responsible for security on that construction site. And then there's a whole host of different kinds of mitigations that we do to make sure that the right people are coming on the site, which is what you saw in the iris scan. Then you also saw in the walkthrough metal detector pictures. And so there's a whole set of processes. I just don't happen to know them all. But what we learned in Moscow changed completely how we do our NEC and our major renovation program. In addition to that, we actually have a particular office inside my directorate called Special Projects that is responsible for a few countries like that. And there's an amazing amount of security stuff that we do to make sure that those things are safe, secure, and functional for its duties moving forward. But that's why these buildings cost so much. When you're sending Americans over to do this job in a particular location, you're going to have to pay for them to eat, sleep, and do all the other stuff. And so it ain't free, it's expensive. And then we ship a lot of materials from the United States there so that we don't have to get anything compromised by buying stuff on the local market. Now, what we can buy in the local market, we will, and we'll do it through random selections and those kinds of things. A lot of things get brought over to the United States. So essentially you're taking something that you would have built here and moving it all the way over there with all the employees and everything. It's not cheap. And that's why but that's also why I think the program, regardless of administration, regardless of political party, has thought it valuable to continue to fund the work because they know the challenge that we're facing overseas and the need to do it right. We started this program back in about 2000-ish, and we started with $800 million a year. And now we're at $2.5 million a year, and it's been the same with Democrats and Republicans. It's always increased. And so I see that going forward. So I don't know exactly the people that were doing Moscow back in the day, but I do know what we've learned and I know what we're doing better about it. Next.
The next question was raised by Ty. Who are some of the OBO's cost estimating consultants?
Nice. I know a couple of them. I just don't know all of them.
I don't know. Am I allowed to disclose that? We use a variety of people. I mean, we have Michael Baker's one, AECOM. We've done work with Jacobs, Faithful and Gould. I don't know if I can remember them all.
Yeah, I think, Ty, one of the things to note is that when you look at that list of IDIQ architects and engineers, I think there's a list that's publicly available that shows you who each one of those cost estimators are.
Right. Morris Wade's another one, does a lot of real work.
But there is an opportunity for any cost estimating firm to be a part of the program. You can either be added on to an existing team if there's a specific specialty that you bring that their existing cost estimator doesn't provide, or you can start working with folks to be a part of the next team. Because in the next couple of years, we're going to be doing our next round of design IDIQs. And there's a whole host of consistent IDIQs that come out that our external affairs group has for a variety of different IDIQs that all require cost estimating services.
Right. We have a couple of IDIQ contracts that we ourselves use the cost officers directly, but most cost consulting work comes as a sub-consultant to a major AE firm who's doing our design work. So that if you're interested in that, if you're, I don't know who you are, whether you're a company or whether an individual, but you would probably best to pursue it, look and see who the AEs are who are providing design services and then apply to get on their list as a sub-consultant.
Question got answered.
Actually, I have one for you, Mangus, that came up in the chat that we skipped over. And it was, what are the 12 basic building types? The models, the cost models that you do?
Oh, yeah,
what are the 12 types?
Well, it would be the Chancery Office building itself, the Marine Security Guard House, the warehouse, the consular pavilions, utility building. I've got 5 of them. I don't know what the others are. If that person wants to reach out to me, I can get them for you.
Yeah, but essentially, it's our campuses are made up.
Yeah, we have on any particular embassy compound campus a collection of buildings that support the main structure, and we've tried to identify the most common types, and I believe we have 12 of them that we've developed a cost model for. So yeah, you got me there.
I like the way that you presented that we have 12 types, but you don't know the 12 types.
For the June presentation, I have my own.
Exactly. Come to the June presentation, we'll know all 12 by then, and the name of all of our cost consultants. That's the other thing. All right, what else you got?
All right, from Rex, can you say a bit more about the internal organization of the State Department for projects? You spoke about your role in cost management and mentioned the construction office, but are there also project management and design offices? Who is the overall State Department project manager for each project?
Yeah, I can walk through that a little bit. So the department is 70,000 people, something like that, something huge. We ain't that. So we're 1,200 of a little bureau. So there's an undersecretary for management, and below them is a bunch of bureaus. We're one of them. We're OBO, and there's about 1,200 of us in there. And then within that, we're broken up into sort of 4 functional directorates and then a support directorate. And so there is a planning and real estate one. So that's acquiring all the buildings, acquiring the sites, acquiring the leases, disposals, valuations, all that lives. Oh, and master planning. That all kind of lives in planning and real estate. And then you have our group, which is program development coordination support, which is a horrible name, but it includes all of the project managers for these kinds of major projects. We talked about the special project management group that's specific to a few countries. We have cost management, and then we have another group called design management, which is all the architects and engineers, essentially the technical arm of the building. And then we have another group called the construction facilities and security management. Sorry, construction facilities and security management, and it's exactly that name. So there's the construction group. So that's the domestic headquarters piece of all the construction managers, and then they also help to support the folks out in the field. We have facilities management that is responsible for maintaining the facilities, and then security management to help to ensure that we have maintain the level of security on our construction sites. And then the last functional directorate is operations, and they have things where they connect a lot with the post. And so you'll have an area management group that liaises with them sort of consistently on the needs that they may have. It has like smaller things that connect right back to post more consistently, like the fire technicians, art and embassies, residential design, cultural heritage. Those folks really connect with them more consistently. And there's one more, SHEM, safety and health. And so those folks are really on the operations side, connecting with posts all the time. And then we have a fifth director to really kind of support. It's got all the money, HR, IRM, the IT folks, the folks that help us sort of manage the building and those kinds of things. That's kind of the support group that supports everybody in there. And so in that organization, like I said, 1,200 people. I think our little directorate is about maybe 350 or 400, about that. That's it.
All right, thank you, Andrew. The next one is from, it's posted by Chowdhury, but it's a question from Glenn. I am not an estimator. When you say unit format, I think he meant unformat. Do you mean elemental? Is the unformat format the same as Hanscom Associates developed in the 90s? What other US government agencies use unformat as opposed to only master format?
Well, uniformat is an elemental breakdown of the project. It goes substructure, exterior envelope, roofing, all that kind of stuff, rather than the master format is kind of by specification section that's typically used by contractors. So we use uniformat during the design phase, and then pretty much we switch that to master format at the bid stage, because that's what the contractors respond to and not the uniformat. Is that the question?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so we can see, the composite costs for particular elements, and that's to inform the design and maintain the budget. But we have great difficulty in getting contractors to submit their bids on that format, because that's not the way the industry works.
Thank you, Mingus. This is your old friend Glenn from Marriott for the answer.
My old friend from where? From Marriott?
Yes, sir.
Okay, long time no talk. How are you doing?
Didn't mean to bust the party, but doing good, Mingus.
All right, well, just drop me a note sometime and maybe we can get together. I haven't seen you for years.
Nice one.
Jan, anything else?
Last one from Paul. Do you practice earned value on your projects?
Say that. Repeat that again. Do we practice what?
Do you practice earned value on your projects?
No.
That's it from the chat bar. If anyone wants to directly ask any questions, they may do so now by raising their hands, and then I can say their name. Any hand raised?
I have a question. If we stay past 5, you guys have to provide dinner. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is physical.
Virtual dinner.
Well, thank you. Thank you. That was awesome. It was a great presentation. Thank you, Mangus and Angel. Thank you for
Thank you.
accepting. I request Doug Mitten from Project Controls to say vote of thanks, please. Doug Mitten was also past AACE-National Capital Section President.
Well, that was a terrific presentation, and certainly on behalf of AACE-International, the National Capital Chapter, it was an honor to have you here today. It was very clear that you're using some of the best industry practices, particularly relating to design and cost, value engineering, project risk assessment, and resilience. And obviously, it's the result of a teamwork between the private sector and the U.S. government. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you for having us. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Mangus, and thank you, Angel.
Thank you, everybody. See you guys in June.
June.
Yeah, okay. Bye, guys.
Bye.